talk about what happens when you get down on the ground. That's where I live. And it's still a long ways to go. We have a lot of good built examples. It's easier to drive people around and go, well, something like this. We're very proud of the work we did in Excelsior and Grand and St. Louis Park. I think that was one of the projects that John referred to couldn't be done today because it does involve eminent domain and tax increment. But it helped people establish an idea, well, what are you talking about and how does it work? And we've learned from the mistakes of doing those first projects. So we've made a lot of project progress, many challenges ahead. And we have, there was a comment about the rural-metro divide, and I'll try to make some comments that are relevant, because I think many of these ideas apply in whatever landscape, whether you're talking about city, town, or village, that the idea of compact, mixed-use, connected development really has application. And there was a question about if we got zero emissions, should we still do this stuff? Well, I took the position for a while of saying, I don't believe in global warming, and of course that got a lot of people excited. But it was really to make the point that even if we found out tomorrow that global warming wasn't true, all of the ideas that we're talking about should still be done. In many other things, economics, this crisis that we haven't begun to talk yet about the fact that in the way we've built our built environment, we've built way beyond our economic ability to sustain that. So there's a lot of economic arguments as well about that. And the good news in all of this, because it's kind of a mixed blessing here, is the market is definitely changing. Reid talked about this, and this is just another version of this slide, but it essentially says, 20 years from now, we don't need any more single-family houses. We have enough based on who's going to be available to buy them. And that's stuff that we pay direct attention to as developers. Who are going to be our buyers? There'll be some new single-family construction as people move around in regions or new product types emerge, but in terms of sheer numbers, we have enough single-family homes today. And so the industry is going to have to take stock and really change the way they're doing things. Before the market turned down, we saw multifamily permits get to nearly half in the Twin Cities after years in single digits or low teens. And so we've seen that change. We'll see that when it reemerges. And what is the new demand? Essentially 1- and 2-person households. And many of those people are going to be looking at walkable urbanism, what Chris Lineberger has called walkable urbanism, 30 to 50%. See a lot of these same statistics, probably heard way too many statistics today, but that's a pretty big market. When people say, people are still going to want that old pattern, well, this number suggests that 50 to 70% of the people still do. But for us developers, there's a big new market. The same Chris Lineberger evaluated the major metro areas and concluded there was really only 5 to 10% of the housing product that was available to the market that may be 30 to 50%, so a real imbalance between supply and demand. So the developers are picking up on that and recognizing there's opportunities in serving that new market. So that's a very positive story, very different than 15 years ago when we started talking about this, when the single-family demand was still just going fast and furious. And it is true that single-family buyers want typically as big a lot as they can afford, as big a house as they can afford. And there was the old drive till you qualify notion at that time. If you went just another 10 miles or another 5 miles, you could get a bigger house on a bigger lot for less money. Well, that's going to change dramatically for a number of reasons. The demographics is one, that there are just less of those people. We also saw, it was very exciting to me on some levels, not to be disrespectful of those households that were really hurt by the $4 gas, that we get in these conferences and we have all kinds of planning and discussion about how can we get the world to change. We get $4 gas and people just change. Because the market responds to the information that they're given. And when they got $4 gas, they make different decisions. It's the same people with the same desires, but they're actually making different decisions. So I'm a believer of the minimum price of fuel as advocated by Tom Friedman and others to help encourage alternative energies and to provide some rational basis for that decision making. We've seen transit has stayed up, but it's beginning to slide back a little bit as gas has dropped back to $1.60 a gallon. As I said, transportation costs are hitting almost 20% of an average family budget now. And so when we talk about if we get zero-emission vehicles, should we still do this? Those costs are out of control. And when we talk about affordable housing, it's pretty elusive when you need 1 or 2 cars in your driveway. You've really pretty much spent your housing budget just taking care of those cars. And so reforming this pattern is a critical function relative to affordable housing. We're, by different estimates, at $1.5 trillion behind just fixing the stuff that we got before we put 1 more new mile of road in, just taking care of what we have. So we're way upside down economically, and we haven't really begun to address that. We've heard about subprime mortgages and so forth, but this disconnect hasn't really gotten a lot of attention. Transportation and buildings, greenhouse gases, the previous speakers referred to that sprawl. Infrastructure is more expensive, definitely more expensive to serve far-flung development. My practice has been in the Twin Cities. I'm from Grand Forks, North Dakota. I summered in Bemidji. That's one outstate town that I've watched develop over the last 20 years, and it's just incredibly sad to me to see the high school go from the center of town to way outside of town, and to see the core of retail go out and to the edge of town. And so these ideas have application, I think, at whatever scale you operate. I think one thing to emphasize, and for all of you to understand about developers, developers take a lot of flack, and they should. It's well-deserved. There's a lot of terrible development out there. But I think to keep in mind that really developers are pizza delivery men. You know, we get an order from somebody that says, I want a pepperoni pizza. And if we go, you know, vegetarian's a lot better for you, and deliver that, they don't buy it. So when Target calls up and we said, oh, you shouldn't have that big sprawling store, that big sprawling parking lot, they say, well, thank you very much. I guess we'll call the next guy, because that's what we're ordering, and I'm the delivery man. Now, in my work in housing, it's a little bit different. But I think we need to talk about, when we got into this Wall Street, Main Street, you know, it's all of us. It's everybody that shops at Target, the consumers that patronize those stores that establish that sprawling pattern and vacate the downtown. So we're all in this together, and it really, in my mind, starts with individual decisions. So clearly the loss of open space, this diagram is one we've used a lot to educate people, and it really the top slide is a compact development of the same number of houses, the same number of stores, the same number of offices, and so forth, organized in a transit-ready pattern. It could be in a small town, and actually it's drawn in a small town arrangement, but you see the preservation of open space on the edge. It takes longer and longer to get to the edge of the Twin Cities now, because we gobble up our edges. And so, and as you move about that pattern, you can move a variety of ways. The below represents really what we have done, which is use up all the land, because we take the open space that's represented in the upper slide and we put it around everybody's house. So everybody's got a little open space around their house, but it has a very different way of working. It's much more expensive to serve the lower half of that slide. And so the previous speakers have talked about the merits of some of that. The progress we've made, I've talked about, is that at the public official level, particularly at the electeds level, most of the city councils in the Twin Cities would vote for these ideas right off the bat. We're working in Bloomington right now on a master plan for 150-acre redevelopment there. The city council is very supportive of these ideas. But when we get down in the trenches as developers, we get down to the public works department, and you know, they don't have such good things to say about this stuff. Or it's either ranges from, this is a bunch of crap, to, oh, I like this stuff as long as the roads are still as big as they used to be. And so a lot of issues when you get down to the nitty-gritty, and I'd say any of those that work in cities need to sit with your public works department and help them understand that a multimodal future means when we sit down and evaluate a project, we're not just looking at what the automobile does. That's really all they do now, how the automobile comes and goes. Is there enough parking? The curve radius is enough? So forth. And we go through whole projects and no one ever mentions the word pedestrian or bike, and are they provided for? So that's where we are today, even in cities where the leadership, the mayor, or the city council will be going, we're smart growth advocates, we believe in this stuff. So there's a tremendous disconnect today between the policy thinking and the on-the-ground practice. I'd say that's probably the biggest frustration I have as a developer, is that the leaders will say, Michael, come and develop in our city, we want this kind of development, and then I go meet with their staff, and it's a very different story. So I think that's a huge issue. Again, the citizens are largely wanting this stuff as long as it's not next to them. That becomes a huge issue. Developers are making money at it. I know a local developer who I know from my conversations with him think this is all a bunch of hogwash. This is the goofiest thing. He said, we ought to spread as far as we can. That's the best way to solve all of our problems. Low density. He doesn't buy into any of this stuff. He's building in the core city because that's where he can make some money. So I think when we see market opportunities emerge, we rely less on philosophy and more on an opportunity for capital to be employed. There's lots of resources and tools, Urban Land Institute, the groups that are sponsoring today. There's so much good stuff out there today. We know what to do. So I think we could, in some respects, well, we always need to learn more. We always need to advance and question, do we have the right idea? That needs to go on. We'll ask the academics to keep that conversation going. The rest of us need just to pause and figure out how to get it done with the information that we have. It's no longer really a mystery. There's a lot of smart people around that know what to do. Starting with connecting land use and transportation, we operate in silos. I'm working on the federal authorization, the reauthorization of the federal transportation bill, and I'm not very experienced in this area. And how does this all work? They said, well, we're going to take that up, but we first have to do the energy bill and the climate change bill, and then we'll do the transportation bill. Well, of course, to somebody like me, I go, how could you possibly talk about those first two things without talking about the third thing? Or how can you have a conversation without talking about all those three things at once? But whether it's a city